Hello, everyone, and welcome to Medieval Freelancing 101, Working Beyond Academia. This is the second session in a series sponsored jointly by the Medieval Academy of America Committee for Professional Development and CARA, the Committee on Center and Regional Associations. I'm Sarah Celentano, chair of the MAA Professional Development Committee. I received my PhD in art history from the University of Texas at Austin in 2016, where I worked with Joan Holliday. And soon after that, I began a career in museum administration. And currently I'm in the development department at the New York Historical Society. Today, we'll hear from 4 presenters who will share how they also were able to find careers that are outside traditional academic positions, but still draw on the skills gained through their academic training. Each presenter will speak for approximately 15 minutes. We'll save Q&A until the final presentation, but please feel free to submit questions as they occur to you using the Q&A feature. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible, and to simplify things, we have disabled the chat for this webinar. Our 4th and final presenter is Ken Monshine. Ken received his PhD in history from Fordham University in 2010. He has since built a career as a public historian, has worked with organizations such as the J. Paul Getty Museum and the History Channel. He's also credentialed as a Master of Historical Fencing by the United States Fencing Coaches Organization. And he's now pursuing a Master's of Education in Learning, Media, and Technology at UMass Amherst. Ken, thanks for joining us.
And thank you very much, Sarah. And greetings from my rather chilly borrowed office at Anna Maria College in Paxton, Massachusetts. Since you don't really need to be seeing this, I hope that you can all see the slideshow pulled up on the screen. So those are my various affiliations, of course, where I'm in graduate school. The Rodin Institute for Independent Scholarship, which I do highly recommend as a networking organization. If you are going to be an independent scholar, of course, Anna Maria, where I'm currently adjuncting, and my business, teaching fencing. So what I really want to do is, rather than really being systematic, I will give you some tips and hints at the end, but I just kind of want to talk about my own experiences outside the academy. And as Sarah said, it's mostly, or best, or I should say perhaps best characterized as public history in some sense. And I'm sorry that I asked this not to be live tweeted, but some of it's not actually very complimentary to me. Some of it is kind of ugly. I'm, obviously still in that grieving and mourning process, and I'm very, very careful to curate my online presence because, well, it's my business. So I want to also say that none of this is really a systemic solution. It's merely gigs, and some of them, as we'll see, are going to be really, really specific to me and my particular skill set and network. So just as a background, and I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly, I found that one thing I learned in my master's education is that we're drawn to visual and also to changing visuals. So do forgive me going through this quickly, but I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I graduated in '97 from SUNY Buffalo, and then I got my master's at Boston University. And then I worked in publishing in New York, and that was very useful for making connections, as I'll talk to you, as I'll mention in a moment. I went to Fordham 2005 to 2010, had a Fulbright to France from 08 to 09. And then, of course, I was cast out into the wide world. And I want to say that I make the majority of my income, unfortunately, from adjuncting, and I still do it. I'm still here adjuncting. And of course, I don't need to tell anyone here that adjuncting is awful. I started teaching here at Anna Maria on the 24th of August, and my first paycheck still hasn't come through because of the particularities of their accounting system. So of course, low pay, no benefits. It is really soul killing in the way that you're not valued as a human being. So if you're in graduate school right now, I urge you not to contribute to the pool of cheap academic labor. And of course, right now, a lot of us have probably lost our positions as adjuncts in one way or another, but I've been holding on doing this and applying to jobs for 10 years. The only real stability I had is that I lucked into a 2-year appointment as a teach out at University of Massachusetts Amherst at their Mount Ida campus, because Mount Ida College closed, UMass bought it, and I knew somebody actually from teaching their kids fencing, and they brought me in. It was not a competitive process, but I had 2 years of a full-time contract teaching there, but also adjuncting at 1 or 2 other schools per semester for a total of around 8 classes per semester. But that was the most financial stability I've enjoyed in these 10 years. So let's not put that down as any sort of solution. So let's just move on. Like Tara, like many of us, I have been writing and freelance writing, especially for a gentleman who's a book packager who I know from my time in New York publishing. This is just the spines of some of my books. And of course, I also write for Peter. And one thing I do, probably the thing that pays me the best, is these Canterbury Classics, which you can find at Costco. And actually, these are a bunch of the ones I've written the introductions for. It pays pretty well, $1,600 for 3,000 words. I get a few of them, every few months, every a year or so. So here's my Hans Christian Andersen. Here's the Brothers Grimm, which I did. There's the Divine Comedy, The Art of War. I did those. It's a good gig, and occasionally I do other things for him, books on short noted textbooks, etc. So there's a lot of advantages to being a freelance writer. It's very flexible. If I decide I want to go for a run or go to the barn and ride, I can do that. It makes you feel like you're making use of your education and skills, like grad school wasn't just sunk costs. And it's very, very portable, which is very important because of our family lives or home situations, wherever they are, that one spouse may have a portable career and one non-portable career, which of course is the two-body problem. So this is something that we should value. On the other hand, it doesn't pay very well and very intermittently. It takes a while to get paid, and you do have to hustle. And of course, as Tara pointed out, that many of these sort of packager models and freelance models, this is the norm in academic publishing, right? It's about increasing shareholder value, not about providing a living wage. It's very intermittent, and of course, there's no health insurance, no retirement, etc. Now, I've had a lot more some other interesting jobs. For instance, a gentleman walked into the fencing club one day and showed me a picture of a sword cane much like this and said, "Is this a dirk or a stiletto?" I said, "No, that is a sword cane." And next thing you knew, I am an expert witness in the Massachusetts court system on knives and swords. I've only ever had that one case, but it's kind of interesting that I'm in the database, and I occasionally get a phone call from a lawyer who wants me to testify on something that I don't know anything about. But I can tell you with certainty that in Massachusetts, you can possess a sword cane. You cannot buy or manufacture one, and specific in the Massachusetts state code. So when the gentleman was pulled over with this thing, actually the cop was just trying to get him on anything, and I helped him get off and beat. So it's a fun story, but not something I would consider a career. Jousting. Well, of course, when anyone tells you're a medievalist, they usually say like a Renaissance fair, and in my case, that's actually true. So I've been a hobby jouster for a while, recreational. We sort of run it like a horse show. I'm still trying to kind of monetize this. My friend Tom really wants to get a contract at Renaissance Fair. It might be nice to spend a fall semester jousting professionally. So, but, interesting skill set. You have to work your particular skill set, and jousting isn't my skill set. So perhaps not in yours, but not just with lances, but also swords. So the thing I really kind of want to concentrate the most time about is teaching fencing, or historical European martial arts. So a little bit about that. This is me and my student Brian. Brian's on the right. And what I teach is called Historical European Martial Arts. Again, HEMA, you may or may not have heard of it. Essentially, what it is trying to reconstruct medieval fencing fighting from the textual records. And this is the Fury de Libere's Flower of Battle, the Getty Museum copy. I had them take this beauty shop, and I did a book for them. HEMA was, as a movement, founded in the 1990s. It kind of sprang out of other medievalisms. You may be familiar with, like, the Society for Creative Anachronism, though in reaction to it, that it's sort of a politics of difference. We're going to create a more martial or more historical form of modern fencing. There's a lot of internet braggadocio to do with this. But the thing I want to point out is they have a very Protestant relationship to these texts. Anyone could read these texts, of course, in translation usually, no matter whether they have expertise or not. And there's actually an antipathy to expertise in this community. Anyone can read the text for themselves. Expertise in either fencing or in medieval studies is not necessary, and received traditions, which I'd call the Catholic model, are sort of frowned upon. For myself, I started fencing in New York in 1998 in a, should say, very traditional school of fencing that went kind of against the modern fencing. And then when I moved to Massachusetts to write my dissertation in 2009, I was asked to teach at the Higgins Armory Museum, and I decided, well, I'm going to do this as best as I can if I'm being asked to do this. So I started pursuing modern coaching certification, and that's how I got my fencing master's certification, specifically in historical fencing from the United States Fencing Coaches Association. So there was another process of education on top of this. Unfortunately, the Higgins closed in 2013, so I took my business privately. So here's my fencing master certification, and there's the late lamented Higgins. So I should say I teach in 2 locations. I only really get paid in one, unfortunately, for a variety of complex reasons we can go into in Q&A. But the problem is that actually my academic training and also my coaching training, even though it has helped me do my job more effectively, enormously so in doing this, but it's also something that many people in the community, because really what we're talking about here is the HEMA is a community. It's a medievalist community. If you're interested more in these, of course, read my columns on medievalist.net. But people don't really like the idea of expertise out there for a variety of social reasons that we can talk about later. There's, of course, it's not very profitable. I still have to pay for insurance, space, my web presence, mileage, etc. So it's a nice side gig, and it's something that I'm definitely known for. Oh, hey, it's a guy at the doctorate in medieval history who teaches sword fighting, right? But it's not really a full-time business. It's more pocket money, some extra, extra change that I can use to buy myself dinner after I'm done teaching. But on the other hand, pretty much all my publications are in some way related to this. I've got instructional manual, Art of Rapier, Art of Two-Handed Sword. I did Nightly Art of Battle on the Getty manuscript for the Getty. I translated Camilla Agrippa and one of the other the other Fiore di Liberi manuscript I found in Paris. It went into my Game of Thrones medieval art of war, and I've been doing sessions on this in Kalamazoo, which I have proceedings on. And my interest in fencing even contributed to my dissertation, which which is on the history of timekeeping, and Johns Hopkins just published my book on the history of timekeeping. So really, in a lot of ways, this interest kind of informed my academic stuff, which I'm still doing. But the value I get out of this, to me, is that it gives me a sense of belonging and meaning, right? I'm creating community. Here's me and my students. And I really feel like I make a difference in people's lives, and I make their lives better. I make them, I give them something. I build a community for them, and we, together we have something. And if I can make a little bit extra money off it, that's great. So, working 6 to 8 jobs, 6 days a week between 2 to 3 different schools, writing, teaching, fencing, etc. Obviously, this is not sustainable, right? People ask me, my mother, so I'm the product of 2 generations of New York City high school teachers, and why not teach high school, my mother said to me. It seems logical. And in Massachusetts, in fact, you can pass the MTELs, the Massachusetts Teachers Educational Licensures, and you can get an initial license. But the problem with this is that, well, social studies and English language arts are pretty filled up, and really no one really wants to hire a 40-something brand new teacher with a PhD. So again, as Tara said, that having that degree, it does militate against you. So I decided, as Sarah said before, to try to pivot to instructional design. It pays well. It's got that portability I mentioned. You can do it remotely, really from anywhere. And what's more, my 10 years in the classroom isn't entirely sunk costs with this, because I have been teaching online, right? I do have that experience. I just kind of need the credentials. And there's definitely less prejudice against academics, especially if you're going into instructional design in in a college or university, then certainly having a PhD is not going to hurt. And there's also K through 12, and there's also private enterprise are possibilities, which isn't to say I'm not upset, right? That I'm not bitter, that I'm not angry. But that kind of brings me to my takeaways. First thing, it's not your fault, right? What's happened to you, not being able to find a career, also frankly being sold a false bill of goods by academia, by your professors as an undergraduate, by your professors in grad school. It's not your fault. You were sold a false bill of goods, and you made decisions for reasons having to do with affiliation, self-image, etc., that are reasonable at the time, but now we have to deal with those, right? You need to recognize and accept that this has affected and will continue to affect your personal life, including things like romantic relationships, where you live, conflicts, your relationships with your family of origin. This is going to affect it, right? Accept it, recognize it, look at that. Don't be afraid to sit with that. Give up what is not in your control. A lot of this is not in your control. Think about what you can control and change that. I can't really be more specific because there's 114 of you, so I can't really speak to all of your situations. But no matter what, you probably have special skills, as I do, which you should definitely capitalize on in an age and life stage appropriate way. It's not really viable for me to to run coffee in a New York publishing house in my 40s. But I can network with people I know in that. And actually, I look to go back into educational publishing, but unfortunately, for the most part, I was in publishing in sort of the beginning to middle of them transitioning to this trafficker and freelancer model. And in fact, they closed down my office just before I went to grad school. Ignore the academy and what you should do. And by which I don't mean I also mean don't be afraid to be rude to people, especially in academia, if they disparage your choices and your choice to leave academia, which a lot of people are very, very, very clueless. Rather, I think you should make your own meaning and your standards for success. I am successful. I have, 8 books I just showed you? Right, that is by anyone's standard successful. I don't have a tenure track job. I don't have tenure. But in a way, I can hold that up and say, look what I did, right? And this gives me, this makes me feel like, even if it's not valuable in academia, even if it's not valuable in the HEMA community, it's valuable to me and it's valuable to the people who care about me. Finally, I will point out that I actually killed, while everyone else was speaking, the last slide, which talked about reform and like what we should do and steps we should take. Reform is needed, but really this isn't really the place to talk about it. I really want to concentrate more, I think, on productive things that we can do in order to better our own situation. So with that, I'd like to thank Sarah and thank Laura, and really thank everyone in the Medieval Academy for organizing this. And with that, I'm going to mute my mic.
Thanks, Ken. More information about Ken's work can be found on his website, kenmonshine.com, which we've just dropped into the chat. I want to thank all of our speakers for being here today and sharing their experiences. I think that we have touched on, raised some of the more difficult aspects of undertaking a career transition, such as we all have, but they are nonetheless important things to acknowledge and discuss. And we can now turn to questions and get a little deeper into some of the topics that came up. What about you? You wanted to speak?
Yeah. Sorry, I mean to butt in before. Briefly, it's been kind of disastrous for me because fencing is something that's done one-on-one in Massachusetts. Has got some pretty strict rules. So one of my clubs has been shut down. We're reopening next month, and the other one I've got some pretty strict regulations, but I switched to having class in parks. Now that's not really so possible because it's getting cold and dark out pretty early. And giving individual lessons. So I found ways to carry on with that. But I also want to say that this is a really good time to pivot to instructional design because there's a bit of a demand for that these days. So, and I don't think that that's going to go away anytime soon.
The next question also broadly applicable. It is, how did you all manage to secure health insurance in the process of transitioning out of academia? And I can actually speak to this myself too, because in the midst of my transition, when I didn't have coverage from a university, I didn't have a spouse, I didn't have really any support except myself, I applied for coverage through the marketplace, the Affordable Care Act. And I was making so very little at the time that I didn't pay anything for it. It was free health insurance. And that's what I was on until securing my current position with New York Historical, where I now have employer provided coverage.
I have the good fortune to live in the People's Republic of Massachusetts. Thanks, Mitt Romney. So we had that before anyone.
The next question is something that I can also speak to, but to also pose it to the rest of you. How might you recommend that current PhDs approach the degree to prepare more proactively for alt-ac jobs before graduation?
I just want to say that reproductive labor is labor and very often uncompensated. We've been kind of pulling in what the anonymous commenter said about that you need a degree of privilege to do this sort of the unpaid work, right? And Lindsay kind of addressed that in that she was working, I'm able to do this master's education because I'm able to take some money out of some money I'm going to inherit, right? That I've got some familial privilege I've built up, which has enabled me to do that. If you have kids, or if you're not fortunate in other ways, if you're the first person in your family to go to college, then there's definitely some problems. In which case, to return to the original question, this is something that Sarah and I have spoken about, a bunch over beers and such, that you need to use your PhD program, as Sarah said, to build marketable skills against your advisor. Change advisors if you need to. But if you need to go against your advisor, do so. But take stats courses, take coding courses, do whatever you have to do to build not a CV but a resume, and do it while you're in graduate school, and you've got some sort of stability. Because believe it or not, it actually is a bit easier in graduate school, and it's certainly not that easy if you get a bit older, especially if you're intending to have children, whether biological or adopted or step situation, because then that really does take a huge chunk of your life and your ability. So, and some of us have partner privilege and some of us don't, and these are things that also must be accounted for, and that's why I said people's situations are all different.
So to piggyback off of that, actually, what advice would you all have to somebody who wants to talk to their advisor about starting to consider an alt-ac career? We're in a bit of a catch-22 situation because it's difficult to talk to our advisors about going alt-ac, and then once we're out, it's difficult to talk to potential employers about having been an academic. My personal experience was, I was very lucky. My advisor was supportive of my decision to move out of academia. She was also very open with me about not knowing how to advise me on doing that. But what about the rest of you? What would you suggest?
I'm very lucky in that my doctoral advisor is a fantastic human being. And I have to agree with what Lindsay said about if they're that negative about it, then you really don't want to work with them at all. But you do also need to realize that that people working in academia often have a very warped perspective of what it takes because they've won the lottery and they think that, why not? But really what they are, they're flat earthers, flat worlders. What is that? They're two-dimensional creatures, and we're asking them to see in 3 dimensions. And it very much challenges their own worldview and their sense of security. So this may be stuff that you can't really talk to your advisor about, but go to the career office, go to your university's career office. There's resources, hopefully, at your institution, which can help you outside of your advisor. And remember that there are resources that are not your advisor.
One more question, and it is, what is currently your engagement with medieval studies? As we've all entered these alt-ac careers, do we still have time to publish or present or be active in academic circles in that regard? My experience will say to a far lesser extent than when I was a full-time academic. I think that would be obvious. But it is something that will always be a love of mine and something that I will always want to engage. So it may take me 2 years to get out, you know, a short article, but it will be fulfilling to do that. And in that way, I still consider myself an active participant in the medievalist community.
I've been organizing and presenting at Kalamazoo for about a decade and a half. Published around 8 books, more really academic, non-academic, try to publish an article a year. Run Medieval mailing list. I write for Peter. I'm on the Facebooks. So I'm very, very active. And I want to say I just do it all out of spite, really. I'm just doing it to be spiteful.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all of our panelists. We hope the information that we shared here was helpful. A lot of, again, difficult questions, difficult realities that we're all grappling with, and not one of us has all of the answers at this point. But we hope we could have provided some direction. And so thanks again to you all, and good luck and stay strong.